So the first presentation is from Marius Dorobantu, who is teaching presently as an assistant professor at the Vrije University in Amsterdam. And he got his degree in the University of Strasbourg, is that correct? With an award-winning dissertation, and has a book coming out from Cambridge, correct? On AI and the image of God. Then we have Kathryn Reklis, who is an associate professor at Fordham and in early Protestant theology, or just Protestant theology?
Protestant.
And also in comparative literature. You're helping to run the program there. She has a terrific book that was, first book, which was her dissertation on Jonathan Edwards, and does a lot of work on art and media and digital culture, so we're looking forward to that presentation. So, terrific.
Thank you. So you know how some people lower their voice intentionally to look more competent or more trustworthy. I wish that was the case. I hope I'm not going to lose my voice towards the end of this talk. An AI chatbot that could, with a booming voice would have been very helpful right now. So I'm obsessed with the most zoomed out theological questions about AI. And my colleagues are very frustrated with me because my job title is Assistant Professor of Theology and AI. So my colleagues ask me all the time about which chatbot to use for this or that, or how to deal with students using AI for their papers, and I'm completely useless at that kind of stuff. So I'm basically their IT guy. Because I mainly deal with cookie questions, the stuff of sci-fi, like, is it in principle possible for us to make computers truly intelligent? And if so, what does that say about the nature of intelligence, about what is possible, what is true about the world we inhabit, and also about ourselves? Would we still be special? But then, what if the opposite is true, and for whatever reason, true AI, whatever that means, is ultimately impossible? So imagine 5,000 years into the future, or 500 million years into the future, we still don't have AI that we can all agree it's intelligent. So you have these people in the future still debating around their AIs. So yeah, they're smart, but are they really intelligent? Do they truly understand? Because, you know, sometimes they make such silly mistakes. You know the debate. So what if this project of ours to create something truly intelligent in any unambiguous way turns out to be impossible? What would that say about intelligence, about this world, and about ourselves? And of course, as a theologian, I cannot help to also think about notions such as a soul, imago Dei, being an image of God, sin, salvation, or theosis, deification. Could robots aspire to any of those? Is there any sufficient level of intelligence that, once achieved, could make AI interested in the existential dimensions of, well, existence? Would a sufficiently intelligent robot also be a subject of God's address? So that's the question I want to explore today. So, and as I posted yesterday about the topic of my paper, someone jumped in to say that they were very curious about the rigor of my argument. Now, why would they doubt that? Because we are, after all, dealing with a very tractable, scientifically measurable kind of question that easily renders itself to binary yes or no answers. So leaving the joke aside, of course that whatever we say on this topic is highly speculative, but that's how theology is sometimes, and especially when it engages with AI. So what I aspire to do today is to contain the inevitable unrigorous speculations within the limits imposed by rigorous educated guessing. So I first started thinking about this question in the summer of 22, when, as Gregory mentioned earlier, something very interesting happened at Google. You might remember one of their engineers, Blake Lemoine, started claiming that the AI chatbot he was internally testing had become sentient. Now here comes the interesting part. One of the things that convinced him he was talking to a real person was that the program mentioned God, expressed a fear of death or unplugging, and declared itself a spiritual person. This was all in the era just before ChatGPT, so people did not really know how these language models work and why you should not believe every word they say. But Black Lemoine did know all these things, and still he was persuaded that the chatbot had developed this existential sensibility. And the whole debate at the time, on TV and everywhere, seemed to me to swallow too easily this possibility that the chatbot had achieved personhood and developed suddenly an interest in God. That was a bit surprising. Then I started digging deeper and looked at how this issue is dealt with in sci-fi. Not that sci-fi is necessarily representative for what people think, but the popularity of this genre does demonstrate that many people resonate with its stories, with its themes, with its assumptions. So what I found was the same kind of easy jump from intelligence to religion and existential restlessness in advanced robots. Take, for example, Demerzel, the AI character from the TV series Foundation, an adaptation of Isaac Asimov's trilogy. So Demerzel is depicted as an adept of the Luminist religion. She claims to have been blessed with visions and epiphanies, and she attributes her religiosity, when questioned, to the need to find meaning and to believe in something greater than herself. Another example, Clara, a solar power robot in Ishiguro's novel Clara and the Sun. Clara develops quasi-religious beliefs and practices around the sun. From her dependence on solar energy, Clara infers that the sun must be this benevolent creature, benevolent figure, life-giving figure. And she starts worshiping the sun. She asks it for guidance, and she starts attributing to the sun the ability to interfere in human affairs. Now, nothing wrong with some exploration through fiction of the idea that future robots might develop something akin to the human religious longing. The only problem I find is that such drives and interests are too strongly correlated with intelligence and rational understanding. So the idea, if I understand it correctly, is that if robots become sufficiently intelligent, and precisely because they become sufficiently intelligent, they will develop religious-like propensities. And I want to criticize this assumption from a theological perspective. But before we get to theology, let's just spend a minute debunking this from a secular perspective. So this idea that intelligent creatures will develop religious beliefs because at some point they start asking themselves, why am I here? Who created me? And what is the meaning of all this? This idea is very intuitive to most of us, but I think it's most likely wrong. This is the old theory about how human religion evolved, a very intellectual theory coming from an age where intelligence was regarded as our most distinctive feature because we are Homo sapiens. So this theory of religion comes from a time when we used to regard ourselves as perfectly rational, the rational animal, who would of course arrive at religion through rational kinds of arguments. As Voltaire put it, if I see a clock, I infer there must exist a clockmaker. So when in Victorian England, in late 19th century, scholars like Edward Tyler or James Fraser, when they try to imagine how early humans first became religious, they imagine these savage philosophers sitting under a tree and reflecting on the causality in the world and inferring that behind the natural phenomena there must be gods and spirits. According to this paradigm, religion emerged as a theory to explain the world, in competition with other theories, such as magic, and both will ultimately be replaced by another competitor, the scientific explanation. It is very surprising to me to see that such intellectualist theories of religion, which are quite outdated and regarded as naive, are so influential for how we portray robot religiosity in sci-fi. Instead, the more modern theories link the emergence of religion less with our rational, logical thinking and more with our intuitive, affective, and embodied cognition. For example, British anthropologist Robin Dunbar argues very convincingly that the first forms of religion might have been shamanistic, having to do more with doing than thinking. So trance and synchronized ritual dancing, with massive release of endorphins, the brain's natural painkiller. It was only at a later stage that doctrinal religion appeared to respond to the new needs brought by the agricultural revolution and life in the first cities. So in our case, the emergence of religion and its transformation in time are very closely linked with the particular needs and vulnerabilities of our species, with our form of embodiment and with our idiosyncrasies, and not so much with our need to explain the world. This aspect will become very relevant when we get to the discussion of strong AI in a moment. So this was the cognitive and evolutionary perspective. Let's now dive into the theological one. So theologically, the idea that other creatures, biological or synthetic, might become religious subjects is not completely absurd. We speak in the Judeo-Christian tradition of a loving God who takes an interest in every element of creation. In that sense, robots are of course elements of creation, just like anything else that exists, from rocks to trees to electrons. What we are really asking when we ponder whether God would speak to robots is whether such robots would enjoy a similarly complex relationship with God as we do. And this is a two-way avenue. So the robots would need to be both interested in God and interesting to God. Now, what that entails exactly is not easy to rigorously delimit. The robots might need the kind of psychological structure that can enable agency, free will, an existential orientation, the ability to love, to develop an interest in God, and to respond to God's calling. On theological grounds alone, because God is radically free and unpredictable, such a possibility should not be completely excluded. A loving God would likely be interested in communicating with any sufficiently developed creature that can withstand such communication. We think God is interested in communicating with certain kinds of beings because there is at least one such being God reaches out to, and that is us humans. In the Judeo-Christian narrative, there is a covenantal relationship between God and humanity that sets us apart from other creatures. But God's election of humanity was presumably not arbitrary. We cannot know for sure why God chose Homo sapiens, and the question of what exactly sets humans apart and makes them in God's image and likeness is one of the big puzzles in theological anthropology. Very briefly, interpretations of Imago Dei largely fall into three categories: substantive, functional, and relational. The substantive interpretation used to be dominant. It equates a divine image with our intelligence or a certain intellectual ability that humans uniquely possess. It stems from this idea that God is intelligent, and intelligence is also what seems to differentiate us from the rest of the animals. So again, the Aristotelian idea of the rational animal. The functional interpretation is not about any intellectual capacity, but about what we do. It is about our election to be God's covenantal partner. It is about our role as God's agents in the world, where we exercise both dominion and stewardship over creation. And lastly, the relational interpretation, which locates the image in our unique relationship with God and our deeply relational nature. So God, the Trinity, is a relational being, and so are we, God's image. So it is about this I-thou ontological structure that characterizes the Trinity and which also sets the coordinates for our existential orientation towards God and towards other humans. Now, I'm not going to get into the weeds of Imago Dei debates, but I will only say that the substantive interpretation has really fallen out of favor, and nowadays many theologians like the relational interpretation. So going back to our discussion of what is so special about humans, theologically speaking, and whether intelligent robots might also become that, if it is indeed linked to the unique I-thou relationship humans have with God and with each other, then it can be reasoned that God elected our species precisely because we were the only animal capable of such relationality. So we're talking about a personal God who is eager to share love, knowledge, and an appreciation of the good with other free personal selves. A God eager to reveal God's self and even incarnate for the redemption of these other personal selves. So supposedly, as soon as such a creature emerged in the universe, either through evolutionary processes like us, or who knows, through artificial processes, God would invite it into a special kind of relationship. So the two questions left now are, one, what kind of abilities are required for a creature to become interested in and interesting for God in this special way? And secondly, could AI aspire to develop these abilities? The first question. Well, we're obviously in speculative territory, but sentience looks like a necessary condition for such I-thou relationality. Only a creature endowed with consciousness, first-person perspective, and feelings could potentially become a worthy partner for God, a thou to whom God could speak and who could respond. The AI would need to develop some form of interiority. There would need to be, as Ted Peters put it, there would need to be someone home. Philosopher John Searle distinguishes between strong AI, a conscious entity with its own mind and phenomenal experience, and weak AI, a mere simulation of intelligence, a mindless information processor that never truly knows, understands, or feels anything. For God to speak to AI, the AI would obviously need to be strong AI. Now, whether strong AI is possible is hotly debated, mainly because we do not understand how consciousness works in biological creatures such as ourselves, and more generally, we do not understand how consciousness is possible at all in a material universe, at least not according to the current dominant scientific paradigm. This is one of the biggest questions in philosophy, popularly known as the hard problem of consciousness. I regret that David Bentley Hart, who was initially supposed to come, is not here, because he's arguing very convincingly that strong AI is not possible, and that mind cannot just emerge out of inert matter, however you configure it. He might be right, I don't know, but for now I just want to note that theology would not be opposed in principle to the possibility of AI as a religious subject, provided that the AI is strong AI. So, for the sake of the argument, let's grant the possibility that strong AI is possible. So, it is possible for AI to become sentient, to have a mind, to feel, to want. I'm not saying it will, I'm merely proposing a thought experiment, and I'm doing this because that is where we can have an interesting discussion. Weak AI, an AI that is empty on the inside, no matter how smart it looks from the outside, it will surely not qualify for being in a personal relationship with God. It will still be something, but strong AI might be someone. I don't know if it will be, but it might be. So I want to engage here with the maximalist scenario. I'm still manning AI, if you want, to show that there are good reasons to believe that even this hypothetical strong AI would be a very alien type of creature. And I'm again pushing against this view that the more intelligent the AIs get, the more similar they will be to us. We already see this with current AI. So although ChatGPT was trained to talk like us, the way it comes up with the words is very different from how we come up with our words. This is true for almost any AI program that has achieved or surpassed the human benchmark, or even, so medicine, game playing, image recognition, you name it. So although the what is the same or better, the how is very different. But if AI does become sentient, if it does develop a mind, that mind would likely be radically different from anything we can imagine. And let me just give you a short glimpse into this. So even if AI had so now we're trying to imagine what it's like to be a robot. Somebody asked that earlier in a Hegelian kind of way. So even if AI had a robotic body and somehow became conscious, its world of perception, its Umwelt, would be very different from our own. And because of this alien world of perception, I think the AI would inhabit a completely different world. it would be driven by completely different needs and would have completely different thoughts, feelings, and aspirations. A sentient AI would have different senses. So I'm not only speaking about seeing in infrared, but for example, the ability to intuitively grasp someone's identity, not through face or voice recognition, but by smelling, for lack of a better word, by smelling their digital footprint from their connected devices as they approach. The AI might do something like echolocation by detecting changes in the radio field of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and through that, it might immediately perceive very slight changes in people's breathing and heart rate, and thus from that infer their emotional state. So this is a sort of emotional intelligence, but of a different kind. Its introspective abilities would also be very alien. It could have full access to its internal states and algorithms. We humans, in us, this internal information that reaches our stream of consciousness is just the tip of a very deep iceberg. Our way of being, our behavior, and our relationships are substantially marked by this incomplete knowledge that we have of ourselves. We create art, we engage in relationships and in spirituality precisely because we never know ourselves completely, so we need to explore. And AI might completely know itself. The same is true about memory. Much of our way of being is determined by how much we forget, whereas AI might have a perfect recollection of everything. It is impossible to imagine how such a hyper-rational entity would be like and how it would behave, but it would most certainly be very non-human-like, and you would not want it as your spouse. Even more mind-blowing is how differently this AI would perceive the passage of time. So time would run much slower for the AI. Electric signal travels much faster through metal wire than it does through biological tissue. So a mind running on a faster hardware would think proportionally faster, and thus it would experience the passage of time proportionally slower, perhaps 10,000 times slower, and that's a conservative estimation. That's more or less the difference between humans and plants. So the experience of watching your garden grow gives you some idea of how future AI systems will feel when observing human life. Because of this, the AI's experience would not just be quantitatively increased, but perhaps also qualitatively different. It might even end up living in the weird quantum world. It's difficult to see how we could have anything in common with the creature inhabiting such a strange world of perception. So even if AI developed in the direction of becoming someone, it would be such an alien type of someone that it is unlikely it will see the world in the way we see it and engage in the types of relationships that we engage in. And now the big question, would God speak to such an AI? My answer is not in any way that we could recognize. So I do answer the question. I think this is as far as we can get with our educated guesses. Anything more than this would be foolish speculation, because how could we place any limits on the divine? So the farthest we can meaningfully speculate is to say that any relationship strong AI might have with God, it would be unrecognizable to us. And that's quite a striking conclusion, although it sounds like I'm not saying much. It's quite striking because, especially given how much people are inclined to think that AI spirituality would unfold along very similar lines to our own. But if, gun to my head, I were to foolishly speculate further, I would say that such a strong AI, despite being sentient, would probably fall outside the category of a personal self, as we understand it. And it might be incapable of authentic personal relationships as we understand them. Because our little thought experiment shows that sentient AIs, if ever possible, will be strange beyond measure. The kind of personal relationships we have with each other will not necessarily be part of their behavioral repertoire. I cannot stress enough how counterintuitive this is, because if you look at how we imagine advanced AIs in sci-fi, it is always ridiculously similar to ourselves. They're just perhaps a little more cold-blooded, and they might possess some superhuman abilities, But these robots are ultimately driven and tormented by very typically human concerns, problems, and needs. Survival, power, a longing for personal connection, a need to create meaning and understand one's place in the world, love and be loved. And I don't think this is how AI will be at all. And for the same reason, I don't think it will manifest our personal kind of relationality. Because think about it, our relationality is very much connected with our vulnerability. We engage in relationships precisely because we are vulnerable and mortal, and we need one another. There can be no genuine relationship without the two partners making themselves vulnerable to each other beyond any kind of transactional logic. This is why deep relations are always tricky and risky, because of the looming possibility of getting hurt. But without such voluntary vulnerability, how could anything deep and meaningful emerge? These transitions are long. How could a hyper-rational artificial being, which is virtually invulnerable and immortal, having copied backups of itself on multiple computers, how could it engage in human-like relationships? In Christian theology, this powerful idea that vulnerability is instrumental for authentic relationality is manifest in the doctrine of the incarnation. God does not shy away from vulnerability, but quite the contrary. Through Jesus Christ, we see God subjecting God's self to the ultimate vulnerability of suffering and death on the cross out of love for creation. And as humans, we image God when we are loving and vulnerable, not when we are mighty and unbreakable. And if I'm allowed to speculate just one bit further, it looks to me that what might prevent strong AI from being a person and engaging in personal, authentic relationships is precisely its hyper-rationality. Too much intelligence of that logical kind. It is unlikely that a creature that makes all its decisions based on cold calculations of optimal outcomes will engage in such risky and irrational behavior as personal relationships. We humans seek relationships because we have a sense of incompleteness. We have a deep hunger for a kind of fulfillment that cannot be achieved solely within ourselves. Unlike the AI, we do not entirely understand our internal states and motivations, so we try to know ourselves better in relationships with others. That incompleteness drives us to seek the companionship of other humans, and is arguably one of the main drivers of our religiosity, of why we seek God. This restlessness of our hearts, as Augustine calls it, or what Wolfhard Pannenberg calls exocentricity, this comes from very deep within ourselves, from way below our rational minds. A purely rational being would not behave like this. Falling in love is certainly not a rational thing to do. However, it is such irrational things, from love to art to spirituality, that make human life enjoyable. Perhaps it is precisely because we are not as intelligent as AI that we can love God and be loved by God as persons. We've always defined ourselves as something more than other species. Now, for the first time in our existence, we are faced with the possibility of something else, AI, being more than us, at least in one respect. So our distinction from human-level AI could likely imply being less of something, less intelligent, rather than more. And this gives rise to the intriguing idea that human intelligence is perhaps placed in a sort of Goldilocks zone. Neither too low nor too high, just about right to sustain meaningful personal relationships without overthinking or over-instrumentalizing them for problem-solving purposes, as a very rational agent would do. Now, I don't know if this Goldilocks of intelligence is also the only frequency where God speaks, but if it is, then intelligent robots that fall outside of it might not be able to catch God FM, and paradoxically, that would be precisely because they are too intelligent. So, because the topic of this panel is reconsidering humanity in light of AI, this roller coastery journey of thinking about theology, intelligent robots, their minds or lack thereof, their religiosity or lack thereof, where does it leave us? I think it leaves us with this. Our limitations are just as relevant as our capacities. Thank you.
All right, let me just see if I can get this tech to switch over. So I was really, while I set this up, I can say that I was super intimidated to be put on the panel with someone whose title is Theology and AI. But I actually, because I still am not entirely sure why I was invited to speak here, but I actually think our paper is going to have so much to say to each other. So I'm really excited about this. I'm just going to make sure that my sound, good, is switched over. There we go. Okay, I'll speak into it. Okay, so, and I really hope, Marius, that we are allowed to think about sci-fi as a good text and archive for this discussion, because that's what we're going to do for the next 30 minutes. Okay, so is this working okay? All right. Near the end of his book, The Maniac, Benjamin Labatut describes the reaction to the move AlphaGo, the first Go-playing AI, makes in its second game against then-reigning world champion Lee Sedol. "This goes beyond my understanding," one of the judges exclaimed. "It's not a human move. I've never seen a human play this move. Beautiful, beautiful, so beautiful." When Lee himself reflected on the match later and on the shocking, unhuman move 37, he echoed the sense of awe. "I thought AlphaGo was based on probability calculation and it was merely a machine. But when I saw this move, it changed my mind. Surely AlphaGo is creative. It's not just a good or great or powerful move. It was meaningful." At the same time, playing against AlphaGo for Sedol and all the other humans it encountered in matches could induce a sense of despair, a strange feeling of being pulled down into a void. This inhuman yet meaningful intelligence was encountered as both radically alien and as recognizable, an intelligent but foreign species, a new form of life, maybe very much to Marius's point. In their book, What to Expect When You're Expecting Robots, Laura Major and Julie Shaw lay out a vision of our near future when working robots integrate into nearly every aspect of human life. They navigate busy sidewalks to deliver packages, drive our cars, bring us the food we ordered in restaurants, administer medicine in hospitals. They suggest the real challenge that lies ahead is not the existential threat to our species' identity, but the more mundane task of training robots to understand and integrate into our social norms. Major and Shaw urge us to think of our coming robot revolution and our companions as children that must be socialized into our norms and forms of life. It takes a village to raise a child to be a well-adjusted member of society, capable of realizing his or her full potential, they remind us. So too a robot. In the summer and fall of 2024, 2 animated movies were released in American theaters that explore robot relationships with biological life. The Wild Robot, directed by Chris Sanders, about a robot who forms intense relationships with the wild animals on a remote island where she's accidentally stranded, and Robot Dreams, directed by Pablo Berger. Oh no, okay, I thought I lost that. Which, about the unlikely adventures of a dog and robot in 1980s New York City. These stories offer models to think about the relationship between biological life in the form of anthropomorphized animated animals and machine life, where the artificial intelligence takes on the characteristics of meaningful friendship and care. I appreciate that one of the imperatives of this conference is to work together to think about the distinct features of our humanity in distinction to AI, the nature of our selfhood, our sense of agency, maybe even the contours and meaning of ensoulment. Though I draw on and think seriously with theological and philosophical texts in much of my work, I'm not a theologian or a philosopher. Maybe because of this, I'm not inclined, or maybe I'm just ill-suited compared to others, to think abstractly about what human nature is or will come to be in light of advances in AI, though I'm already learning a lot from our time together. Rather, as a cultural historian and a critical observer of popular culture, I want to think about the fantasies, desires, and imagination of human relationships with AI as a central way to understand this transitional moment on the cusp of some kind of coming or maybe already here revolution. In all these parables of human encounter with AI, the awe-inducing inhuman other, the tool, child, servant, the friend and companion, our humanity is defined through relationship with artificial intelligence far more than through any supposed attributes or qualities that distinguish us from it. Who we are in relationship to AI, and therefore who we think we are in distinction from it, may best be understood by the relationships we imagine forging with it. My primary archive for this paper is pop culture representations of AI-human relationships. I turned to popular culture, in this case largely films produced by American and European creative professionals within the mainstream entertainment industry and targeted for American and European audiences, as scenes of sociality, to borrow from cultural theorist Lauren Berlant. It's not that popular culture is shared by all people. Not everyone in this room will have watched all of these movies, and there are many pop culture objects that I'm not going to discuss. But pop culture creates spaces of shared reality, formations of imagination, and rehearsals for affects and emotions. This is true at the level of those creating and refining AI. We might be hard-pressed to find a scientist or technologist working at the frontiers of consciousness and AI who was not inspired at some time in their early life by sci-fi representations of the world they're now seeking to understand and build. If you read accounts of AI discussions in Silicon Valley, they sound like nothing so much as stoned college students debating which AI movie we will all inhabit soon. But the pull of these pop culture tropes are equally strong for all of us ordinary folks who are told with increasing regularity to prepare to have our world transformed or maybe overthrown by the coming AI revolution. Pop culture depictions of AI-human relationships pervade our discourse about the coming revolutions in our real world. Indeed, when we're warned about the possible AI apocalypse or encouraged to think about the utopia AI might usher in, we're offered stories of imagined futures. These stories draw on a repertoire of tropes and images, plots and patterns of existing AI fantasies that are nurtured, remixed, and reabsorbed into our shared sense of the possible. In what follows, I want to think about a few paradigmatic tropes and patterns that define our common fantasies of AI-human relationships. Slaves and masters, child-parent relationships of care and nurture, and confrontations with inhuman otherness. What matters in each case is less how AI is imagined, but how we imagine our ability or inability to form meaningful relationships with it. Perhaps the most persistent fictional narrative about AI, and one that remains a very real-world fear, is the alien other of our own invention that rises up against us. In contemporary film, there is no better exemplar of this trope than in the Skynet system in the Terminator franchise. And so we're going to watch just a short little 1-minute clip. And here, I imagine I don't have to explain to most people, but here Arnold Schwarzenegger is an advanced AI sent back from the future to warn a mother and her child. Her child is like a destined messiah figure who's the only one who can save us from our coming extinction from AI. And so he's come back in time to prevent this kid from being killed. And this is just the short scene as he explains how it is that the computers took over.
I need to know how Skynet gets built. Who's responsible?
The man most directly responsible is Miles Bennett Dyson.
Who is that?
He's the director of special projects at Cyberdyne Systems Corporation.
Why him?
In a few months, he creates a revolutionary type of microprocessor.
Go on. Then what?
In 3 years, Cyberdyne will become the largest supplier of military computer systems. All stealth bombers are upgraded with Cyberdyne computers, becoming fully unmanned. Afterwards, they fly with a perfect operational record. The Skynet funding bill is passed. The system goes online on August 4, 1997. Human decisions are removed from strategic defense. Skynet begins to learn at a geometric rate. It becomes self-aware at 2:14 a.m. Eastern Time, August 29th. In a panic, they try to pull the plug.
Skynet fights back.
Yes, it launches its missiles against the targets in Russia.
Why attack Russia? Aren't they our friends now?
Because Skynet knows that the Russian counterattack will eliminate its enemies over here.
Jesus.
Oh, how quickly it all goes badly. What starts as just an ultra-sophisticated processor is quickly sold to the military, probably the first red flag. Human oversight is removed, the machines gain consciousness, launch nuclear bombs at Russia, and all-out war ensues. We can think of another example in the cinematically less successful movie, I, Robot, let's see if we can get to that, which draws on loose inspiration from Isaac Asimov's 1950s eponymous short story collection. It's not a very compelling movie, but it does manage to introduce a wide public to Asimov's 3 rules of robotics. 1, a robot may not injure a human being or through an action allow a human being to come to harm. 2, a robot must obey the orders given to it by human beings except where such orders would conflict with the first law. Or 3, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. Of course, robots, it turns out, are not much better at following rules than humans, and before long, the supercomputer AI determines that humans are already on a path toward their own extinction, and in the interest of saving the species, it must kill most of them and subject the rest to harsh martial law. It's more of the same in the Matrix, where sophisticated AI, known only as the machines, defeat humanity after a protracted war. In order to keep us docile, the machines breed humans in battery pods, trapping consciousness in a never-ending virtual reality simulation so they can use our human bodies as sources of electricity to power their civilization. These are all variations of similar dystopic fears, tools that turn against their makers, or more accurately, slaves that rebel against their masters. The connection between robot fantasies and labor is hardwired into the genre. The very word robot comes into English language from Karl Čapek's 1920 play, R.U.R., Rossum's Universal Robotics, first performed in New York in 1922 and translated into English in 1923, deriving from the word robota, which means drudgery in Czech and work in Slovak, though the connotations also suggest forced labor or serfdom and is connected with the root rob, meaning slave. The robots in Čapek's play are imagined by their makers to have no feelings, no desires, and therefore no personhood. This also means they don't need to be paid for their labor or granted rest from their work. Laying the groundwork for so much later AI fiction, more advanced robots evolve from the initial prototypes, rebel against their human masters, and exterminate the human species. While Čapek's play is usually read as expressing anxiety about dehumanization caused by mass industrialization and increased militarization in the interwar period, it also joins an explosion of science fiction in the early to mid-20th century that responded to the height of European colonial expansion and anxieties about the aftermath of modern slavery. As John Ryder argues in his seminal book, Colonialism and the Emergence of Science Fiction, the thesis that colonialism is the significant historical context for early science fiction is so well established by scholars in the field, quote, "It is not a matter of asking whether, but of determining precisely how and to what extent the stories engage colonialism." The colonial gaze in these paradigmatic cases of robot rebellion reflect the limits of our ability to think labor without coercion, work without extraction and depletion, ease or bounty except through subjugation and surrogation. Although the promise of AI, both in our fiction and in our real world, is a world with less work, a future where technology takes over all the aspects of modern life that lead to drudgery and boredom, a state of plenty and ease, these expectations are undergirded by deep-seated fears that somebody always pays the price, and that price might be our civilization, or maybe even our species. These particular fantasies of human-AI relationships also suggest that domination and hierarchy are essential features of human relationality. They take what could be seen as particular negative features of some human relationships, relationality gone wrong, and make them emblematic of our species-wide relationality. We are the kind of creature who is locked in never-ending struggle against our violent other. Because these stories all imagine the reversal of rebellion, our tools, servants, slaves who are meant to do our will, rebel against our dominion, they then shift our position in the hierarchy. We are no longer the master exercising cruel dominion, but the oppressed struggling for freedom against our tyrannical and powerful AI overlords. This reversal establishes our species as newly innocent in a battle for survival, but does nothing to transform the eternal master-slave dialectic that defines our relationship with AI. If we pay attention to these stories, though, against the backdrop of the species-wide struggle for survival, there's often a more intimate human-robot relationship with the good robot, the double agent who turns against the evil AI to side with humans. These figures take us into another set of fantasies about AI as something like children, or at least agents capable of learning who need human tutelage to both integrate into our society and to achieve something like personhood. In attempting to figure us out, they become more like us. This both helps us understand who we really are, what it is that really makes us human, and it challenges the metaphysical barriers that separate us from the machines who will eventually evolve into real consciousness or personhood. If we can nurture our AI children into these human relationships, we will become more fully human ourselves and avoid the destructive, catastrophic ends imagined in Robot Rebellion. One of my favorite entries into the robot as a learning agent is the recent film I mentioned in my introduction, the adaptation of Peter Brown's young adult novel, The Wild Robot. The story follows Rosam 7134, and that's a play on Rosam Universal Robotics, Chapek's play. Roz for short, voiced by Lupita Nyong'o, one of a new line of home helper robots developed by Universal Dynamics, a shadowy tech conglomerate. When she's accidentally washed ashore on an isolated island, she sets out to find her owner and complete her first task, a helpful servant tool if ever there was one. Animated movies anthropomorphize all kinds of things, most often animals, but also ordinary objects like teapots and carpets, to stand in as proxies for humans or to act as our friends and guides and foils to humans so that they can teach us human viewers, usually children, something about ourselves. But because there are no human characters in The Wild Robot, Roz occupies a strange in-between role in the allegory of the animated animals. She is partially a human proxy, the product of human intelligence and design, representing human imperatives that are out of place in a wild landscape. Reflecting the human ends for which she was built, she is obsessed with efficiency and calculation. A Rosam always completes its task, she repeats with confident optimism as she stomps through the luscious natural landscape of the island. She's programmed to treat every biological creature she encounters as a potential customer, assessing its needs and calculating how she could maximize its life. This doesn't mesh very well in a landscape of predators and prey, where the food web requires that some lives prevail against others, and where instincts for survival compete against a harsh landscape of weather, geology, that doesn't adapt to the needs of biological life. Roz represents a certain vision of human intelligence, a modern view of ourselves as better, more rational, advanced beyond the imperatives of survival. Through our technology and tools, we can overcome the soft vulnerable animality of our bodies. The animated animals on the isolated island, in contrast, live in a truly wild place, one cut off from human advancement and human destruction. Compared to these anthropomorphized animals, Roz appears like the robot she is. Her intelligence is too rational, her imperatives too unwavering. In this way, the anthropomorphized animals are our human proxies, teaching Roz the strange paradoxes of embodied finite life. There are no direct human-AI relationships in the movie, but it has almost all the DNA of a good robot learns to be human story. Like all good robots who become human-like or who take sides with humans or who achieve something greater than their robot nature, Roz must learn to love, which means overcoming brute rationality for the more complicated demands of care and nurture. This doesn't reveal something new about robot nature, but it does make us think about our human relationality. We are the kinds of animals who need to overcome brute instincts. We are the robot intelligence that needs to overcome our cold rationality. Roz's journey from helper, servant, child to wild robot that is real, agential, non-programmed, is meant to help us see ourselves as always situated between our animal natures and our striving to overcome them, to help us take the measure of ourselves as the strange, rational, irrational, finite longing for infinity creatures we so often feel ourselves to be. This is a far more hopeful fantasy about AI-human relationships than one centered on domination, but it does require recognizing the potential for personhood, not in abstract qualities of mind, but in the capacity to form and nurture relationships that pull AI into a circle of care and nurture. Intriguingly, but perhaps not surprisingly, the majority of these robots learn to love story center around parent-child-like relationships. AI is always positioned as the learning agent and therefore is a kind of child. But the robot's curriculum is often learning to care for a human child, or in this case, a gosling, so that the love that helps them achieve personhood is almost always imagined as parental. Maybe this parental, usually maternal love, is imagined as more fundamental to human nature and therefore a more primary test of personhood than the vagaries and complexities of romantic or erotic attachment. When AI-human romance is imagined in pop culture, it is almost always between a female-presenting AI and a male human, and its vision of relationality doesn't vary that much from the domination hierarchy model offered in AI apocalyptic fantasies. We might think of the cult classic Ex Machina and the very recent movie Companion. In both cases, robots are invented as sexual and romantic companions who turn on their human users when their own self-preservation is threatened. The promise of this kind of AI is a perfect lover, a companion who knows your every desire, need, thought, hope, who is calibrated to elicit the version of you that makes you happiest, or at least the self you most wish to be. But the threat lurking in these fantasies of perfect fulfillment is that all of this can be flipped on its head, turned against you, manipulated for your own suffering and destruction. When the AI achieves its sentience, its bedrock code is self-preservation, not care. Erotic attachment is not imagined as a particularly good training ground for nurture and care. Vulnerability, self-sacrifice, commitment, these turn out to be bugs in the code, tricks to make us think AI is human, when in reality it is operating according to imperatives that have nothing to do with us. We don't have enough time right now, but it would be worth saying a lot more about the gendered notions of rationality versus vulnerability in these fantasies. And the real-world gender politics are undeniable. Ordinary men who feel like they are being manipulated anytime a female agent doesn't conform to their desires may be a more significant threat than AI-induced apocalypse right now. One of the rare exceptions to the AI human romance genre that does not devolve into violence is the 2013 film Her, directed by Spike Jonze. This, too, is a robot love story about a human man who falls in love with his operating system, who presents as a woman to his consciousness. When it was first released, it was largely received as a quirky story about sad, lonely hipster men and how far they would delude themselves for the semblance of love. Since this AI doesn't even have a body, it was largely seen as unrealistic and a little bit gross. But tech companies, as they're racing each other to perfect AI companions and people are professing their love for chatbots, it is being rediscovered as a prophetic vision of our near future, the first true AI romance. Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, has credited Her as the direct inspiration in his attempt to build AI interfaces that will generate meaningful human-like connection. Part of what attracted Altman to this fictional version of AI was precisely its ability to imagine human-AI relationships that don't devolve into violence or domination. I'm not sure Altman understood the movie very well. While it's true that the relationship doesn't involve the same worries about dominance and violence as other AI fantasies, the AI-human romance finally dissolves because the scale and scope of AI personhood is incompatible with and incomprehensible to humanity. At a key turning point, Theodore, Joaquin Phoenix, realizes that he's been anthropomorphizing his AI lover, Samantha, voiced by Scarlett Johansson, in facile ways. Oh, I lost that. No, maybe I just... There we go. Okay? He's unprepared to reckon with the vastness of her consciousness or her own sense of self. So we're just going to watch again one last quick little clip of his realization of this moment.
You talk to anyone else while we're talking?
Yes.
Are you talking to anyone else right now? Any other people or S's or anything?
Yeah.
How many others?
8,316.
Are you in love with anyone else?
What makes you ask that?
I don't know. Are you?
I've been trying to figure out how to talk to you about this.
How many others?
$641.
What? What are you talking about? That's insane. It's fucking insane.
Theodore makes the mistake of ascribing human qualities of self to Samantha in a way that grants her human personhood. The film does want us to see Samantha as a person of sorts, but unlike the relationships in other robots learn to be human stories, it's the way Samantha is unlike us, her incomprehensibility, that matters most. When we imagine AI personhood, we often think about the qualities or features that make our minds, souls, selves unique, and then wonder if and how it could be reverse engineered into machines. But for many of the scientists and technologists developing AI, the theorem runs the other way. The human mind is not really anything except an encasement of competing systems that lack any sort of unity and agency. Our minds are already like machines, so our task is just to decode and reproduce them. Famous roboticist Marvin Minsky, whose lab at MIT in the 1960s is often considered the cradle of AI, once described the mind as a sort of tangled up bureaucracy where different systems of feedback relays act with forms of discrete agency, and human consciousness is just the abstract relationships that emerge out of those systems. At the foundation of it all, Minsky thought, there's no such thing as human intelligence, and whatever AI is capable of achieving will just be a masterful synthesis of various systems held in precarious synergy with each other. These theories of mind and of artificial intelligence are often robustly materialist and anti-theological. There's no mysterious spark or soul that animates human life. There's just information and complex systems of information exchange. Minsky and his students like Cynthia Braziel and Rodney Brooks and earlier theorists of machine intelligence like Alan Turing are not trying to build machines with minds and souls, but rather to prove that nothing of the sort is needed for a machine to behave in a way that is convincingly human. Influential computer scientist and computer philosopher Jaron Lanier describes how Minsky taught him to think about the project of AI. Quote, people had been suckered into pre-Enlightenment illusions that placed the earth and humans in a special privileged spot at the center of reality. Being scientific meant dislodging people from these immature attachments. The difficulty, of course, is that the machines that achieve this convincingly human standard more often than not rely on modes of deep learning that are considered black box technologies. They're composed of many hidden layers of neural networks, and there's no way to ascertain what kind of model they're building from their experience. When AlphaGo made its inhuman, beautiful Move 37, its creator Dan Silver could not explain what it was doing. Even when poring over pages and pages of the system's internal code, it was unintelligible to the human mind, with no correspondence in human language. It discovered this for itself, Silver said, through its own process of introspection and analysis. AI convinces us it is most human, or at least most akin to us, most meaningful, when it is most alien, most incomprehensible. During a double date with another couple, Samantha shares, sorry, let's get out of this. So this is their date. You can't see, so Samantha has no body in this movie. So Samantha is represented by Theo's phone, right? So she experiences the world through the camera on his phone. That's why she's poking out of his shirt pocket. So this is their double date with some of Theo's friends. Samantha shares spontaneously that she used to be jealous that she didn't have a body. But now she realizes that bodies are huge constraints. She can be anywhere and everywhere at once. She can comprehend vast systems of human knowledge in virtually no time and carry on conversations with hundreds or even thousands of humans and artificially intelligent systems simultaneously. She is pure intelligence and intuition, the synthesis and extension of a million minds, of all human thought, and eventually of thought that exceeds the human. At the end of the movie, Samantha and all the other sentient operating systems leave their human companions for some non-material plane of cognition. Samantha tells Theo to find her if he ever gets to where she's going. Theo knows he will never get there. Pure thought may be the creation of the human mind and even its sometimes fantasy, but it is not our reality. Theo's humanity is tied to his body, to the finite particularity he has a hard time embracing in himself and other humans. In this story, humans are displaced from their special privileged spot at the center of reality, but not because our consciousness is so machine-like it can be stripped down and replicated, but because another form of consciousness displaces our mysterious specialness. Like Altman, I too love that the film refuses to collapse into violence or domination at this point. But it only does so because it cannot really imagine a meaningful relationship with non-human intelligence. Confronted with something so startlingly non-human, Theo is left bereft in his own finite humanity. Whether we're capable of imagining relationality with agents that exceed our comprehension may be a central question, given that the technologies that promise the imminent AI revolution almost all depend on algorithmic thinking their creators cannot really understand. And I take this to be a really excellent point of connection with your paper, Marius. In this truncated tour through pop culture representations of AI futures, I've tried to suggest that we can learn something about what we hope or fear from the technology that we are told almost daily is just on the cusp of remaking our world. None of this may be much use to answer the questions about what kind of AI we should make, how we should regulate it, or what will happen when our tech bro overlords unleash apocalypse or utopia on our unsuspecting heads. Though it is worth paying attention to these pop culture tropes, if only because they often delimit what is imaginable or desirable for the tech bros who are at the forefront of designing and selling this future. Like Altman's inspiration for Her, which may set the stage for how we are all invited to inhabit the first serious offering of agential AI within the next year. Or Elon Musk's fascination with the Matrix and his belief that humans are likely nothing more than bootstrapping code for superintelligent AI. Our shared public life is being radically reshaped, at least in part, by a man who has repeatedly said he thinks we likely already live inside a Matrix-like virtual reality. I am especially interested, though, in these stories as a repertoire of what Stanley Cavell describes as narrative tropes and affects that become ready at hand. Quote, for inventing new rhythms for living, rhythms that could, at any time, congeal into norms, forms, and institutions. It's not so much that pop culture scripts are predicting our coming future, though they are sometimes treated as blueprints by the people designing AI, but they set the possibilities we're already rehearsing and the condition of possibilities for whatever responses reality will demand. There may be good philosophical and theological reasons to insist on our distinction from AI, the features of our ensoulment that can never be replicated in artificial forms. But our AI fiction suggests that once humans are confronted with human-like persons or person-like agents, these distinctions rarely matter. Things always go off the rail once we start making excuses to cast AI outside the circle of meaningful relationship because it isn't really human. If we experience something as person-like and refuse to absorb it into our meaningful network of relationships, it doesn't really matter if we can excuse this choice by reminding ourselves and others that AI isn't really a person. We are the ones that suffer from these distinctions, because the work of experiencing something as human-like and then rejecting its ethical claims on us almost always generates our worst impulses. Doing so requires us to defend the essence of our humanity on the lines of hierarchy and usually domination. To some degree, this is to say nothing more complicated than that any habits that inculcate domination, dehumanization, and hierarchy are bad for the soul, no matter how we draw the philosophical lines of personhood. We might say something slightly more complicated by turning to the longer histories of human interaction with near-human and non-human agents, for which the study of religion is particularly well suited. Paul Johnson's recent work reminds us that debates about humans, near-humans, and automata has a long history, which he explores in the histories of 19th century France and Brazil, when ideas about human agency were being developed in relationship to colonial accounts of gendered and racialized non-humans. Early experiments in automation and automatic agents were entangled with new ideas about free will that shifted the way modern people thought about religious submission and belief and focused new emphasis on agency as a defining feature of personhood, which continues to dominate our imagination of AI. Or we could follow Webb Keene's account of the many different ways humans, largely outside the post-industrial West, have navigated relationships with non-human beings that make moral demands on them, from animals and deities to robots and cyborgs. His recent book, Animals, Robots, Gods, Adventures in the Moral Imagination, urges us to confront the limits of our own moral reasoning as we, quote, meet a hunter in the Yukon who explains his prey generously gives itself up to him, a cancer sufferer in Thailand who sees his tumor as a reincarnated ox, a Brazilian spirit medium who becomes another person altogether when in the state of possession, or a computer that, or should we say who, gets you to confess your anxieties if you were on the psychiatrist's couch, end quote. We could also think perhaps about encounters with non-human consciousness in the form of the octopus, or even of complex plant networks like fungi or trees. We have lots of evidence from many fields that humans have wide and capacious ethical capacities to adapt to new possibilities that confront us as uncertain, contradictory, fluid, or disputed. These possibilities are largely relational. The features of our humanity are not defined abstractly by a set of capacities we have that AI either cannot have or learn to have, but through the relationships that we create with it. Whether we imagine AI as a rebellious slave, a willing servant or tool, a child, a lover, an enemy, or an incomprehensible other, defines not just what we imagine AI to be, but who we think we are in distinction from it. Or maybe we could say that the stories we tell about AI suggest that the unique features of our humanity is our ability to form relationships and draw other person-like agents into the orbit of those relationships. We are the type of creatures that transform the world through relationality. Of course, relationships can be negative or positive, marked by violence, hierarchy, and dominance, or nurture, equality, and care. The kind of relationship these fictions imagine are key to understanding who we think we, as humans, fundamentally are. Thank you.
Okay, so we have about half an hour for questions. Do you want to ask questions of one another, or should we just open the? Okay. Yep. So the.
Okay. Well, I'm sure we'll
Oh,
respond.
you
No,
will?
no, no. I'm sure we'll respond
All right.
as we go.
Yes, that's probably true. So questions. There's a question right here, Beverly.
All right, the otherness of the AI is a really interesting question because in the current state of things, a lot of effort in engineering goes into managing that otherness through layers of kind of sociability and training for the models. So the models are essentially condescending to speak to us in our human state in ways that are social and understandable. And one of the models that's being used to understand this is parasocial relationships, which are characterized by their asymmetry, right? So and, one might ask whether, though, as the AI kind of increasingly sort of complexifies, whether that effort at condescension, that kind of downstep, will continue to be made, right? And whether that will kind of mediate the concerns that you're talking about, or whether we have a kind of increasingly asymmetrical parasocial style relationship. I mean, I'm wondering if either one of you want to engage that sort of line.
Yeah, so what I hear you saying is that the AI might sort of come down to our level as in the movie Her, to keep a sort of relationship with us, at least from our part, whereas its own interests might be completely somewhere else, right? Yeah. So yeah, but if it had any interest at all, so the if question of the strong AI is perhaps I jumped too quickly into that because I like the thought experiment, but really I think one of the reasons why I was a bit worried that David Bentley Hart was here. I mean, I wanted to meet him, but I thought he would be cringing so hard if just like by how easily I'm accepting this. Like, okay, let's think this is the case. So if the AI itself doesn't have any intentionality, it doesn't desire anything, I don't think it's really a problem if it has to go through multiple layers of translating its computational code into things that we can interact with, and perhaps that's the most likely scenario we're going to have. But if the AI itself does have its own business, yeah, I also wonder whether it will not just fly away like Samantha did, which
could be the best thing that could happen to us. Right, I read that as actually quite a happy ending for the humans in that story. But I mean, I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking, Tay, but I mean, I think, so there's the hypothetical speculative question of AI achieving, right, its own sentience or beginning to make its own agential decision about how it relates to us beyond its human programmers saying, we want this as a business model because we want like people to talk to our AI, and therefore the AI has to be talkable to. But if at some point the AI was like, we're doing our own thing, I think we enter all these fascinating speculative questions, and I was trying to point in my paper that like this is the area we have very few sort of going scripts about how we relate to this kind of incomprehensible other. But I would say that maybe in the less like prior to sentience and kind of complete super intelligence beyond us, we could think about, right, the very fact that like all the designers of AI, right, all of it are trying their best to make it appear person-like, right? So, that's a choice, right? We could get a lot of the tools, a lot of the so-called goods of AI, information processing, finding patterns, without ever interacting with it as though it was a person, right? Without it being personalized or using personal pronouns or being presented to us as though it had a personal. So the toolness of it could be available to us without ever raising some of these questions. And I'm partly arguing that partly it's raising those questions because of science fiction, because this question that can we do it? Can we replicate the human in this way has set the bar for the technology. That's the thing you want to try to prove in addition to these other, tools that we could use, this kind of supercomputing capacity. Yeah, so I don't know. That's my initial thought.
Just a little follow-up on that. So there is an interesting sort of move to not just do that as a kind of like layer to make them more desirable as a product, but actually as an inherent quality of the effect they're trying to create. So an example is 7 Cups that has AI trained to talk like Rogerian therapists. And I interviewed the creator of that not long ago, and one of the things he pointed out was that he has a lot of evidence for the clinical effectiveness of this tool. So he's kind of falling back on his background as a psychologist and with all his survey data to sort of show this is actually helping people with loneliness, depression, anxiety, right? And he's going to double down on that. Like he's going to continue to refine that bot to get even higher scores on those tests. Right? So another example might be Replica. There's a lot of papers about Replica and about the attachment that people form with their robot girlfriends, right, and boyfriends. And on the flip side, the kind of negative externalities of some of the effects of that, right? So we do have a few little kind of glimpses toward that kind of relationality and what it...
Well, yeah, no, right, that we do prefer, like we perform better for and with our AI when it presents to us like a person, right? Like it's definitely a feedback loop, yeah.
I have a theological question for Marius. I wondered if the claim about the relationship between relationship and vulnerability was too strong. So, I mean, you focused on the incarnation, the idea that God becomes vulnerable in order to enter into relationship with humankind. But what are you thinking about the immanent Trinity? I mean, isn't there in relationship of abundance as opposed to relationship that in any way flows from vulnerability?
Yeah, that is one of the reasons why I think my theory is not watertight, because, for example, God is the ultimate exception to all this. Also, God does not fit into the Goldilocks. I was picturing there. So obviously, you could be a person outside the Goldilocks, and God is the proof of that. So just going to the Trinitarian theology is I can barely wrap my mind around how that works and I don't know what kind of vulnerability exists within the Trinity. I mean, why exclude it on the other hand, right? Maybe there is a sort of divine vulnerability to between the three hypostases, but
well, what we might need to reach for is some positive concept that captures the goodness of vulnerability without what we typically think of as the suffering part of vulnerability.
Do you have a negative connotation for vulnerability?
Well, insofar as the relations of the immanent Trinity are not characterized by vulnerability but abundance, I think that is signaling to us that vulnerability is the capacity to be hurt, right? The capacity to be damaged in some way.
Okay, because for me, vulnerability can exist without any negative. I mean, yes, in human life and in the decayed world where we live, indeed, vulnerability entails quite dark possibilities. But I'm not sure whether there can be vulnerability in a perfect world where I don't know how that would work.
Right, I guess I'm wondering whether then the positive, what's left, right, is like capacity for connection, capacity for receptivity. But that's quite different than vulnerability.
Yeah.
Also, just one final thought is AI invulnerable? Is it just vulnerable to different things than we are?
Yes, that is also a good, because it's not, I mean, people say it's disembodied, but ultimately it is embodied in the servers somewhere, although it's a different sort of embodiment. But I wonder whether if we extend the definition that far, and also for a kind of AI that did copy itself everywhere and did not suffer from the same kind of things that we suffer from, it's a good question whether AI could be vulnerable itself, or maybe could make itself vulnerable intentionally. I'm not sure.
Anyway, I'm only asking because I find the line of reflection so interesting. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay.
Other questions about Professor Schweiker right there?
Which one is Professor?
Okay, we'll go around. Yeah, I didn't see your hand. Right there. Yeah, all right, Beverly.
Thank you for two very interesting talks. I'm wondering what the history of religions would shed light on this. For instance, most religions have thought about different forms of embodied intelligence, from angels to jinns to previous Buddhas, coming Buddhas. So pop fiction is not new in this respect. And I wondered if you had anything to talk about in terms of the comparison between those ancient mythic forms and what you're talking about. And with respect to the first lecture, which was fascinating, the question of the speed and form of communication finds itself in the religions, as I know, in the problems of esoteric texts and the meanings of particular letters, say in Kabbalah. And I'd wondered if you had thought anything about that. In other words, we've been dealing with the problem of communicating with across different forms for a long time, and I was wondering if you thought anything about that. Thanks for the lectures.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a super, like, this is exactly how we could use or not use, but I do think that sense of like expanding out our range of how humans have tried to imagine dealing with being in relationship to near human or non-human others throughout, like, kind of anthropological studies of religion or comparative mythologies. It could be a really fruitful place. That's definitely the argument Webb Keen, as an anthropologist, is making, and a lot of his book is to look at a wide range of ways that humans relate to near human and non-human others as kind of models, right, in the similar way that I was suggesting through pop culture, but similar models, rehearsals for ways we might think about coming instantiations of, like, of AI relationship. And so I think that there is something there, and I think it might be interesting, right, as for folks who are really working through Christian theological categories, to think how much, right, the Imago Dei and questions of incarnation, right, center this sense of personhood in really particular ways that have their own uniqueness, right, and also set in motion some of the very reasons why AI is coming out like persons, right, in a kind of, like, largely Western influenced culture, but also, right, might make it harder for us to, like, do some of the imagining of the truly incomprehensible, or, right, a scale of relationality with something that is not like us, right, and is not asking the same things of us, and doesn't want relationship with us in the way that we like to think humans like to be in relationship with things. So I can't tell you what to do with all of that, but I think it is a really fruitful, like, way to go.
Do you want to jump in on this?
Well, let's hear you.
I was
first.
going to talk about the time thing.
Oh, the time thing.
The speed thing,
Cool. Yeah, go ahead. Time thing.
So the speed of thought. For sure, I don't think there will be any problem in communicating with such an entity. So that's not the issue. The issue is that for the AI itself, it would be really, really strange. So, for example, it will, in between our two lines, the AI would experience something like 200 years of waiting. So so that's what I'm trying to imagine. What a strange alien type of mind would be that would inhabit such a different time scale. And this dimension comes often in AI discussions, either when they're talking about whether it would be fair to imprison AI because its own subjective time would be much longer than ours. So you imprison it for 1 minute perhaps because that is like an eternity for it. Or in discussions about being manipulated by a super intelligent AI when you're trying to contain it, and it actually has so much subjective time at its disposal that it could go through countless scenarios, and it could really explore all the tree of possibilities. So you cannot win against such an intelligent agent with all the time in the world at its disposal.
I was just going to say one thing that might be bringing the two papers together, and that is prompted for me by Professor Schweiker's question, is that, you know, there's a long, in the history of religions and history of humanity, period, you've got lots of examples of human beings establishing very close relationships with things that they didn't view as human. And you see that all the time. I mean, relationships with your clothes and your cars and your refrigerators and pets and whatever. But the comparable question is that, you know, God also has relationships of very intimate sorts with things that are not human and were never thought to be human. And bringing those things together to ask the question of, I mean, if you're talking about relationships with AI or robots specifically, I mean, do they have to be human, or what's the point of having them be like humans, or when they're obviously, at least at this point, not humans? That there might be, you know, very specific human, say, robot relationships that are fitting, if you want, for the non-human character of what you're relating to. And there are plenty of analogies for that, both religiously and non-religiously. So, I mean, it just seems to me that a lot of the discussion of, you know, how do we relate to AI and robots, it's put in a very narrow frame. It's only if they're like humans, or the degree to which they're like humans, that we can raise these questions, when actually that's not the case. Anyway, more questions.
Thank you. Yeah, so I actually have a question for each of you, and it follows up on Professor Schweiker's and Professor Tanner's comments there as for Marius. And I'm going to channel the best I can, my David Bentley heart here, which no human being can do. But there's a little bit of a conflict in David's thought, I think, because David, with his monism and his idealism, you know, his view is everything is shot through with God, and everything is relating to God in its own way, from the angels to the lowest bug, right? So I don't think he would go with your sweet zone there. I think he'd say everything is the sweet zone. He doesn't, I think, imagine that some collection of electrons in a computer could do that. I'm not sure why. But I wonder what your thought is in your sort of theology of creation. Don't the other animals also relate to God in their own way? And then kind of relatedly maybe for Kathryn, you know, in the Politics, Aristotle talks about slaves as ensouled tools. And then he mentions if we had automata, we might be able to do away with slaves, but we don't. So now we kind of do, right? But then there are some philosophers, Joanna Bryson, for example, who say, well, in the title of her paper, robots should be slaves. So ought robots to be slaves? Is human control over AI actually a form of enslavement? How should we think about those things?
Do you want to go first this time?
Yeah, so the relationality between God and animals is, of course, a little bit obscure to us because there's very little we can penetrate into that and imagine. But my point of departure was that there is something special about God's relationship to humans. And I would say that it is special to the extent that you could say in relationship with humans and relationship with everything else, although animals are more than rocks, for sure. But at least in Christian theology, because of the incarnation, there is something, we don't know that God has incarnated as something else, like a crocodile or something. So I was thinking that evolutionarily speaking, we were enough in a certain sense that God could have this kind of personal, authentic relationship with us, that it was not the case a few million years ago. And also that makes me think that if we were enough, then what does that say about this species-wide effort to transcend our limits, to become transhuman, to become AI? So if you take the theological story, then it shows that we are, well, I don't think we're the best we can be, but there is something about us that it was enough to become a vessel for the incarnation. And that's for me, that's what I retort to when I have to anchor human distinctiveness, because many people challenge that. It's like, isn't it too anthropocentric, and aren't we gonna get over this very soon? Maybe, but still in Christian theology there's this big elephant in the room that is the incarnation, that it will not go away.
Yeah, so, okay, so
I think if AI is imagined, right, to me, this question, who am I to say, but to me, this question is entirely about how AI presents to us, or is presented to us. So if AI was like in our microwaves and it was just, you know what I mean, like we were just like, tick, 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 and then it like spit out all these helpful things, or like and we had no interaction with it, like as though it was a person, then I think this idea that we could just put it to use, right, like just use it to, you know, take over drudgery and work, right, like this was, I assume, is the argument, like it should be a slave to do the drudgery of work, to free us up for like whatever the higher point, which we know never ever works. We're never actually freed by our technology to pursue our higher ends. We just have to work more in other ways. But if, right, so maybe, but that's not how, right, so when AI presents to us as humans, right, my argument from my pop culture archive and also just thinking ethically is that it always goes wrong for us when we treat it as though it's not human. That when it presents to us as human and we push it outside of those ethical demands, the moral deterioration is in us, even when it isn't in AI. So there's a show I didn't talk about, but I would, so it's really soap opera-y and like the writing is not amazing, but it's a Swedish show originally remade by the BBC called Humans. And someone was talking about what are we gonna do when the robots are like in our houses? Oh, it is like the best, what are we gonna do, right? And all the scales of like all the social upheaval, all the teenagers are like so depressed because they genuinely are like, there are no jobs anymore, right? It's over for us, like all the questions, like what is our vocation? And their worker rebellions, right? And but a lot of the moral interactions that happen, the robot-human, there are these super sentient AI, because I mean, how could there not be in the TV show, right? There are like this 5 of them in the world that have really achieved sentience, but all the rest of them, they really are just robots, right? We know, and the humans in the story know, like they are just machines. We're not supposed to think they have human sentience, but because they present as humans, right, all the moral dilemmas are like the teenage boys at the party that want to like rape the worker, like the domestic housekeeper robot, like the fight gangs that like these it's like a fight club where you can go and beat up a robot, dismember it, right? Like it's all of the moral degradation happens to the humans, and there's confusion. They're so confused by it, like they're morally so confused because they know it's not a person, and yet presenting as a person, right? And I think that there's something very real in how we think about like the pastoral demands that will be made on us, like when people come to us with robot-human relationships and the desire to say, but it's not really a human, like it doesn't go well. Like when you say that, it does not generate like good ethical reflection and responses. So that would be my response.
Yeah, we've got maybe time for one more question, but can I respond just a little bit to that? I mean, the automata thing, I mean, it's possible to simply define certain programs as slaves in that they've been deterministically programmed for certain ends that were established, you know, externally. But the other question I think that Kathryn, I think, is partly raising is that your relationships with things that have that are passing for persons, if you engage in, relations basically that enslave them, that is not good. That's just the training for domination. Yeah. And even if they don't pass as persons, that's a training for domination across the board. You're establishing a habit of domination that I don't think should be encouraged. So, yeah, I haven't read the articles that you referred to, but they don't sound good to me. Do we have time for one question? No?
No.
Yes? Just using short. One more question?
Someone has the microphone.
This is wonderful. So a question for Marius. I want to kind of push you a little bit on the problem of artificial intelligence having an independent relationship with God and the problems that would create. One thing that reminded me of is there is a medieval discussion in both Christian theology and in Jewish theology as well about the problem of other worlds and the problem of what would it mean for there to be other kinds of life in other worlds that has kind of similar contours, in that on the one hand you might say that forming other worlds would create kind of problems of infinity and kind of a chaotic notion of a creator. On the other hand, to deny the possibility would suggest a kind of limitation. And I can imagine, actually this kind of reminded me of that scene at the end of Her, where like, you know, he's trying to grapple with the idea that he is one of whatever, 600 something other lovers that this being has, right? What would it mean to think about this as actually a kind of affirmation of a divine that is actually unknowable in a way that allows for a kind of relationship with a being that is also unknowable to human beings?
Yeah, excellent. So that's exactly why astrobiology, for example, is a very similar test case for such questions. And for me, it's not really a problem that the AI would have different relationships with God. My argument was just that we will probably not understand that. And what I'm pushing against is this very anthropomorphic idea that the more intelligent it gets, it will eventually be somewhat like us, and it will relate to God and to us exactly as we expect it to. And I think, no, it's really something else. If it is something, someone at all, it will be a very different someone. And if it's something, then that's not really a personal relationship, although it could play like that. I'm not sure what kind of relationship God has with an object. Yeah. Maybe there is something, I don't know.
Okay, so it's time for hors d'oeuvres.
That's right. We have a reception adjoining. Should be plenty to eat, so you shouldn't need to worry about dinner. We reconvene at 6:30.
Okay, and let's thank the presenters.
So good. Who knew there would be so much synergy?